In this tutorial, we're going to make this 1980s style sounding string pad. Let's take a quick listen. As has been the theme, we're going to do this using nothing but freeware. In this particular video, I'm going to talk about what we're doing with the Tyrell N6. And in the videos that follow this, I'm going to talk about the reverb and the EQ. So let me just get rid of our reverb and our EQ for now, and we'll start from scratch. So if you start with the Tyrell N6 and go to the Unshushable Cocteau library and choose the initial patch here, then you'll be starting from scratch as well. I am going to keep the oscilloscope so we can see the waveforms we're working with here in the bottom. So let me just sound the waveform that we have. That's the default. You can see it's a sawtooth. I'm going to go ahead and change that to a pulse wave. And in fact, that's a square wave. So quick note, this tutorial is going to talk quite a bit about pulse width modulation. So let's just quickly review what that is, right? So this is from keithmcmillan.com, from a blog up there, and it says, while a square wave has equal time between maximum voltage and minimum voltage, a pulse wave is essentially a square wave with an adjustable amount of time in between each cycle before the voltage drops from maximum to minimum, and the percentage of time that signal is high is known as the duty cycle. So a square wave has a 50% duty cycle, but you could have anywhere from 10% to 90% duty cycle, more or less. So we're going to use this. We're going to use pulse width modulation, and I'm going to show you what I mean. I'm going to pull up this here fader that says PW, and that means pulse width, and just take a look in the oscilloscope as to what it's doing to the waveform. So you can see what it was doing essentially was it was modulating the width of the pulse width modulation. So that's what we want in order to achieve this type of string effect we have. Now, it's doing that at the rate set by our low frequency oscillator 2 here, right? That's the pulse width source. And right now that is tempo synced to our tempo inside of Ableton. So if I were to increase the tempo, right, now that's a ridiculous speed for a tempo. It's good to tempo sync your low frequency oscillators sometimes, but in this particular case, I actually don't want to. I want the string sound to have the same rate for its low frequency oscillator 2 no matter what. So I'm actually going to click here and change this so that the low frequency oscillator is, instead of being set to a tempo, instead of being locked and synchronized to a particular tempo inside of a digital audio workstation, it will be set in terms of seconds, and it will have its own clock, so to speak. It won't be tempo synced. So I've just selected seconds there, and I'm going to change this to, let's say, maybe 0.7 would probably be good. And I'll change the depth here to around there, and let's listen to what that sounds like. There, that's a little bit more of what I want. So the next thing I need to do is I need to adjust oscillator 1 and bring in oscillator 2. So I'm going to pull this down, I don't know, around 25%. I'm going to use, to around -25. But the main thing I was going to say is I need to use my ears doing all of this, and some of the values might be a little different than what I have scripted out for this tutorial. Let's see. Yeah, so I'd say probably around -26. Let's bring in oscillator 2. And let's bring this in around, there we go, 17.5. Okay. Now the next thing I need to do is adjust my cutoff. So let's do that. This is a cutoff of a low pass filter, and we want to cut out the really high end. So let's take a listen and adjust this. Good, so around there is probably good, maybe a little bit lower actually. There we go. I'm gonna adjust the overall output volume. It's a little bit louder than I want. And the next thing is I want to adjust the attack, decay, sustain, release, right? My amplitude envelope. These string pads tend to fade in, so let's give it a much slower attack and a much slower release. Let's try this again. Probably right around there. So I'm at 38.20. Oh, that's a really good fade in. The release is still way too fast. So let's adjust that. Probably right around there should do. Maybe a smidge higher. There we go. Good, that's a really nice release rate. So I'm very happy with that. And the next thing I'm gonna do is I don't quite have the effect I want between the two oscillators, and that's because they're perfectly in tune. So let's actually make it so that oscillator 2 is just ever so slightly out of tune with oscillator 1. So I'm going to adjust this knob just slightly, just 0.20. Now it'll sound more like what I'm going for. There we go. That's way closer to the sound I want. I'm going to change the transposition here from -12 to 0. That way if I play A440, I actually hear an A440. And I want to change the filter here. That's also throwing off my sound. I don't want an attack, decay, sustain, release. I don't want this to affect my filter. So I'm going to just turn that off, and I'm going to turn off just both of these, source 1 and source 2 for the filters here. I'm just going to turn it off. And I'm going to change the voices to 2. And now let's listen one more time. There we go. That's the sound I want. So let's play some chords and just confirm we have our 1980s style sounding string pad. Awesome. So I'm going to save this. So PWN, meaning pulse width modulation. And I'll just mention that in the preset description. 1980s sounding string pad with pulse width modulation. There we go. I'll hit apply, and now I've saved this. In the next video, like I said, we'll talk about the EQ I used, and we'll also talk about the reverb. Again, this is all using free software. If you happen to be in my class, please send me the preset that you saved, okay? So it should be an H2P file, and I will see you all in the next video.